Good morning, Matt.
How's it going? How's it going today, my friend? Good
Doing
to
very
be back in the
well.
DMZ. Yeah.
I survived my 6-year-old's birthday party this weekend. That was a grand achievement. I think
Yeah, that's an accomplishment.
I mean it really should be a parental holiday. The child did nothing to get to six. It is the parent that broke his or her neck to get to this day. We are the ones who survived this process. So,
Yes.
and for that reward, I ate all the leftover birthday cake. But still, a
So
successful
you're like
event.
Tom. You're like Tom Cotton. You know this? Tom Cotton eats birthday cake every day.
I did read that. I thought it was a little strange, but nevertheless, I did go overboard on presents. I had a panic on the day of the birthday that I was gonna be one present short, and she would be crestfallen. So I had to overspend on some magic kit that she once said in passing she was interested in. It wasn't a cost efficient birthday. I celebrate a birthday in the liberal way. I threw money at the problem, but it worked. So a good day was had by all.
Well,
And,
that's
and
good. It's not easy being a dad, as you know. I don't like to use,
um,
I don't like to throw the word I don't like to throw the word hero around a lot, Bill, but it's not inappropriate here.
I concur completely. Um, but this we always have to talk about your need for disclosure when we discuss presidential politics because your better half works for the illustrious Rick Perry. We
Yeah.
are taping this on Wednesday. The buzz is that Rick Perry is going to announce on Thursday. I'm not asking for inside information here. Um,
Well, I don't have
and
any. I would say that I do like, I try to do the disclosure. It turns out I could have just given $75,000 to Rick Pack and not disclose that. But I'm such a fool that I've been going around, talking about this.
well, if you
I don't
did it
have any
that
inside
way,
info.
all the
I think
presidential candidates would still come to get interviewed by you, just like George Stephanopoulos got Rick Santorum to announce on his show.
it is amazing how Stephanopoulos has totally survived that. They could have put him in a bind had Republicans sort of stuck together and boycotted his show. But they didn't at all. They immediately caved for whatever reason, and so it's water under the bridge now. But does that mean that
Can I ask you questions about Perry, or do you just need to just beg off totally?
Oh no, I want to talk about it. I'm actually gonna I'm writing I'm gonna write a piece about this. I can talk about it just with the disclosure. My wife consults for Rick Pack, and I don't have any inside info, but I have lots of thoughts and advice because I've been interested in Rick. I've liked Rick Perry and been interested in Rick Perry for many years, and I think I have hopefully some insight into his candidacy.
I mean, the big question for him, of course, is how do you recover from a disastrous presidential run the first time? I mean, that he became the punchline
Well, I've
of the
got three
20.
keys to how he can recover, Bill. Number, no, you're right. You're right. You're right. It's an it's an obstacle, and it's funny how fickle people are. 4 years ago, he was the rock star, and everybody, was so excited about him, and he was going to just come in and be a world killer or whatever. And now, it's sort of tentative. I think people are generally liking what they're seeing, but he has to overcome the stereotypes that were created that 4 years ago when he ran and it did not go well. And I think he has to have a moment to overcome that. Just as it took a moment and in fact a series of moments to create the negative perceptions about him. I think he can overcome it, but it won't be easy. He has to have moments. And I think he probably has to get in the debates, right? I mean, that's we've talked about this a lot, but if he doesn't get in the debates, it poses a challenge to have that moment.
There's two things I want to tease out there. So he needs a moment to grab headlines, reconfigure perceptions about him, get a platform again. you could say that about almost all of the third tier candidates at this point. I mean, when your front runner is only at 10 to 15% and you're at 1 to 2%, it doesn't seem that big of a gap, but you need to do something to break out and get into double digits. Now, I had a piece over at Politico this week, which was entitled Newsflash, It's Going to be Hillary versus Jeb. So I laid down my marker. I made the pundit cardinal sin of making a flat prediction that I can be strung up with later on. But the premise of
for all of your insights, we have established that predictions are not the strong suit. So
I think the political editors didn't know my track record when they consulted with me on the piece. But the underlying premise is that Jeb may be and is a weak front runner. He's in a 4-way or 5-way tie, depending on the poll you look at, and he's not the front runner at all in Iowa. Although Iowa has generally nominated losers past few cycles, but he still is going to be extremely well financed and have a lot of institutional support. So a Jeb opponent is going to have to consolidate everything else to be competitive with him. And you need more than one moment to do that. You need several moments. You're not going to just sort of grind that out. You need to really break out big. And obviously it's very early in the race, but can you, if you're a campaign consultant or a marketer or whatever, can you put a fine point on here's what one does to create a moment, particularly in a Republican field? Because Bobby Jindal can say Rand Paul's not a commander in chief. Well, that's not much of a moment, is it? No Republican thinks that, pretty much. So it can't be just as simple as issuing a press statement and taking a swipe at somebody. It's got to be bigger than that. So what's the secret sauce to having a moment?
Well, let me say a few things, Bill. Number one, I think it's less than 50-50 that Jeb gets the nomination. In other words, not only am I not predicting that he will be the nominee, I'm not nearly as confident as you. In fact, I would say it's less likely he will be, for what that's worth. I think Perry is running for a few things. I mean, he obviously wants to win, and I think if you're buying stock, buy his stock. I mean, I think that last time he was probably overestimated. Well, I think last time he was probably, if Rick Perry were a publicly traded corporation or whatever, he would be the kind of stock you might want to buy, because I think he was overestimated last time, and I think he's underestimated this time. I mean, he's still incredibly charismatic, incredibly likable, and I'm talking about the retail aspect of him, Bill. I mean, if you meet this guy in Iowa or New Hampshire, it's impossible not to like him. He is incredibly likable, incredibly charming, and authentic in person. That matters still, even in a wholesale TV age. That gets you something, certainly. I think he's underrated this time, just as he was probably a little bit overrated last time. So I think there's a lot of room for growth, and I think there's, it's sort of the old misunderestimated line. I mean, the fact that he's being underestimated, I think probably helps him right now. It's good that he's had, last time, remember, he got in the race very late last time. We can go through the whole back issue thing and the medication that he was on, but he got in late. He was essentially airdropped in the middle of a race, a campaign. Debate started very quickly. This time, he's had time to sort of dip his toes in the water, acclimate himself, get up to speed on things. So I think that he is underrated this time, just as he may have been sort of ranked, too high last time. And I think that's a good place for him to be. It's better than I would say that maybe it's actually better to be Rick Perry than to be Scott Walker, who now has been thrust into the, top tier. We know what happens.
Well, this is also part of the argument I had in my piece, which, I focused on Walker a bit more than the other also-rans. But the notion that you might get your 15 minutes, Walker had this moment in the sun after his speech at the Iowa Freedom Summit back in January, gave a better speech than people were expecting. but then he couldn't follow through. He kept gaffing. He gaffed on evolution. He gaffed on how he was going to, I fought unions so I can fight ISIS. He had this weird moment where we talked about last week where he said, well, if you didn't vote on something and you just said it, it's not a flip-flop. Therefore, if you're an executive branch official, you can't flip-flop. Only legislators who vote on things flip-flop. So they can really shove down his throat later on. All these things seem to be putting...
By the way, let me say, he said something, nobody picked up on this, but I thought this was interesting. I don't think anybody picked up on this. I saw him he was in Florida yesterday, as was Perry, for this, Rick Scott had some sort of a forum or whatever. And he did an interview on Cavuto. I'm talking about Scott Walker here. And he basically said that his birthday would be the cutoff line for Social Security age, whether or not we should raise the age. That it was essentially like if you're his age or older, and he mentioned like his actual birthday. If you're his age or older, then they wouldn't touch, or maybe it was if you're a day older than him. I forget whether or not he would be included. But essentially, his birthday. Was that meant to be if you're older than?
Was that meant to be a serious comment? Or was he being glib like, I don't want to do anything that affects my benefits?
It seemed like a serious comment to me. No, it wasn't like joke. It wasn't a joke. It struck me as odd that, like, if you're older than him, you wouldn't have to worry about it. But if you're his age or younger, then the Social Security age, retirement age, would be raised. I thought that was a weird and interesting thing to say, to make yourself the center of it, and your actual birth date, presumably. Maybe I should go back and pull this video and write about this. Or see if anybody else has.
So I get this sense with a lot of the candidates that they don't have what it takes. They might have what it takes to give one speech or have one debate moment that will temporarily elevate them, but none of them strike me as being ready enough for prime time to sustain that after that moment. And Rubio.
Right, but let me say, I think, first of all, I think Walker had a moment, as you implied. So Perry could have a moment like that. But I think he would have the ability to potentially sustain it for a few reasons. One, he ran before. And I think that, you can't underestimate the importance of having run before, lost, learned lessons. And I think that matters. And I think it helps him. It might help him sustain it if he catches fire. Obviously, he has to catch fire in a way that would undermine the stereotypes about him, which are, failure to recall, mastery of issues. He needs to overcome that. And I think a gaffe on those areas would be especially devastating to him in light of the past. So he has to avoid those gaffes. But look, I think a couple things about Perry that I like. One is, he talks about the back surgery and the medication he was on. That very well may have been a contributing factor. If you watch those debates, he always started off strong. These debates lasted like an hour and a half, and it was always the last half hour where he fell apart. Whether it was fatigue or whatever, I found that interesting. But here's something Perry did that I like. He went back to school. He did what we always wanted Palin to do, but she wouldn't do, which is after Palin ran for Veep, we wanted her to go back to Alaska, serve out her time as governor, and bone up on the issues, become an foreign. She knew about energy, but learn about economics, foreign policy. She didn't do it. Perry essentially has done that. And I think that that's good. He obviously wants to be president, but I think maybe this race, if he doesn't become president, a potential cabinet post, or even just redeeming himself would be a good reason to run. I mean, if he performs very well and falls short, I still think he has a lot of things worth fighting for and a lot to prove. And so that's all I have to say about that.
So you're cutting out a little bit, so I don't know if you've stopped talking yet or not.
Oh, yeah, that's the whole question with me in this show. Do I ever stop talking? I've been sitting here for 30 seconds, Bill, in silence, waiting for you.
Okay. So one other point that I made in my piece that I thought was going to be an obstacle for people to uh, elevate themselves to go mano a mano with Jeb was you have all these upcoming votes in the Senate, and you got four senators running that are divisive for Republicans. We just had this NSA vote. There's going to be votes to keep the government open in the fall. All the spending bills are going to be tough votes. If you got to bargain with Obama to keep the government open, that means a lot of compromises that conservatives are not going to like. There's the export-import bank issue. There's they might have to revisit the Highway Trust Fund. They did a short-term patch recently, but they're going to probably revisit that later in the year. All these things seem designed to make life uncomfortable for people. I mean, Rand Paul can do his grandstand move on NSA, but it makes everyone else, it puts everyone else in a tight spot. And as we get farther along in the race, all the people who are not in the Senate are going to get asked about, what do you think about this vote? What do you think about that vote? And they all seem designed to not make everybody happy, and you need to consolidate a pretty broad swath of conservatives if you are going to elevate yourself against Jeb. But I don't see the landscape being conducive to that prospect.
I think, Bill, I think you're wedded. You're a little bit too wedded to the old ways. In the old days, Jeb would have been unstoppable. It would have been a juggernaut. I don't think his money matters as much nowadays. And in the era where, so much has changed, including the super PACs, including just the ability for candidates to kind of live off the land and garner earned media. I just feel like Jeb's going to have a saturation problem. I mean, at some point, there comes a point where the utility, or the benefit of spending an additional dollar in Iowa just becomes almost pointless. In other words, I think Jeb will have more than enough money, say like in Iowa, New Hampshire, North Carolina. But I don't know that it's going to matter. Like, there's a threshold that you have to meet in order to get your message out and to have your name ID where it needs to be. He's not going to have any problem doing that, but I don't think most of the other candidates will either. And then the additional benefit of having an extra $10 million or whatever, I think it's diminishing returns.
Well, it depends how big the discrepancy is.
I don't know that the money thing matters that much.
I mean, having a few dollars more doesn't matter much. If you have a lot more, then it does matter. If it's a big discrepancy. But
there's this Yogi Berra line. It's if nobody wants to come out to the ballpark, there's nothing you can do to stop them. And these voters know about Jeb. The likely Republican primary voters know about Jeb. I think it's baked into the cake, and most of them really don't. They're not ready for it. They're not ready for Jeb. And here's the other thing. There was that CNN ORC, I don't know if it's pronounced ORC, whatever. There was a CNN poll yesterday that came out, and it showed 3 candidates within striking distance, within the margin of error of Hillary Clinton. And Jeb was not among the 3. That's a problem.
I agree. If you have poll after poll after poll where Jeb is consistently not competitive with Hillary and others are. I think that would be a big problem for Jeb. I suspect that this one CNN poll coming off of a pretty bad week for Jeb with his stumbling over the Iraq vote is probably a low point for him. And I think Jeb is a more experience, as it is family business. I think he's going to be able to recover from that easier than someone greener like a Walker or Rubio or Huckabee or what have you. But it is interesting that it was Walker, Rubio, and Paul that were closest.
Rand was actually number 1.
Right, Rand was one point behind, and that's always kind of weird because I think he gets a certain amount of young male left-wing support in polls, it seems, that tends to elevate him in some of these trial heats. But I think if he ever got remotely close to being treated like a front runner, all the bricks from the sky would fall on his head, and that would not last very long.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that, Bill. I think that Rand, if he ever becomes a real threat, especially in a general election, will be very easy to demonize. The other thing is, by the way, he's only getting, even in that poll that has him leading. And by the way, I have to look at the numbers, but I've heard somebody just emailed me and said that Democrats were overrepresented in the universe that they surveyed in that CNN poll. But either way, if Jeb were the only candidate, or if Jeb were, let's say Jeb were beating Hillary in polls, but nobody else was, then I think he would have a rationale for his candidate. It's the electability thing, the electability rationale. Only Jeb can do it. He's the only one who has the name ID and the organization and the money. That's a rationale to overlook all the other problems that we might have with him, but that rationale does not exist. And so I think he's got a real problem. I do agree with you that Rand is, I think in that CNN poll, only getting 2% of the women's vote, even in the poll that shows him leading.
Amongst Republicans.
Which is
amazing.
amazing.
This is not in the general he versus Hillary. That's in the Republican primary contest.
But isn't that unbelievable, nevertheless?
I find it very believable. I mean, I think his brand of libertarianism is very much a young male brand. It's not a women's brand. And I can't say I know exactly what his Republican women want in a candidate. But I think even when you watch the Rand ads, when you have that President Paul chant in the ads, it's a decidedly male chant because that's who's in the crowd at a Rand Paul rally.
It just strikes me as that I think you're talking about that ad that was produced by like an outside group that. Is that the one you're talking about?
No, the most recent one where it's like a monster truck show.
Yeah,
but it's a similar point. I mean, it's definitely an ad that's designed to appeal to young males. It doesn't have anything to do with what appeals to women.
Well, I mean, as a no longer a young male, but as a dude, that ad struck me as bizarre and just very weird.
Well, especially since
I don't know who that.
I mean, this is all around the NSA debate, which Rand Paul's doing, top-notch grandstanding to delay the bill as long as possible and to temporarily end the metadata program, although that lasted for 3 days, and fundraise off of it and try to enlist volunteers off of it. So everybody that said it knew this was straight up grandstanding to help his own campaign, that he had no chance of actually ending the program. And you could say, well, all's fair in love and war. He's allowed to fight to the bitter end and make his point. But at minimum, it's a very serious subject. How whether you're on the privacy side or the security side, it's a serious subject. And then to have an ad treating it like literally a wrestling match. If you have it, the ad's called Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. If you want to find it on YouTube.
Sunday, Sunday, Sunday.
Right.
And I've had people question like, why does this gender gap exist? And one theory is that you have security bombs, that women care more about security, and that would be a prime reason why Rand would not be their favorite. Let me just say this, though. Here's what I don't get about some guys, right? So Rand sort of has the heavy metal thing going. Like, I'm sure if you go to a heavy metal concert, it's all young men, right? And I've always thought, wouldn't you want to go to like a Billy Joel concert where there are chicks? Like, if you're a guy, if you're a young man, wouldn't you rather go to a place where women are going to be, whether you like Billy Joel or not? I'm not editorializing on the piano man, but given the choice between a WASP concert, which is going to be nothing but 15-year-old dudes like you
are seriously dating yourself, sir.
Let me go at least to the 90s. System of a Down. That brings me up to at least the late 90s. Versus I don't know. Help me out here, Bill.
What are the kids like?
Gin Blossoms concert.
LMFAO. Do the kids like that still?
I think my point is universal. Apply it as you will. Maybe like an Arcade Fire concert. I don't know. But whatever the case, my point's
Your point is taken.
I have nothing. I got
So one other thing I want to say about the NSA debate, it strikes me how the civil libertarian groups were deriding the bill in the final days, saying this is weak tea. This is not going to seriously constrain the NSA. It's a very, very small step in the right direction to give the data over to the telecoms and have some criteria for what the NSA can do to access it, but it's very thin criteria. And we'd rather see the program sunset altogether, like Rand Paul is fighting for. That's the preference. That's what the ACLU said. And now after it passed, you're seeing more. Snowden won. He changed the debate. Blah blah blah. But they weren't saying that 3 days ago. Part of that's being abetted by because Mitch McConnell sort of oddly stalling this, even though the reform passed the House with a huge bipartisan vote. It was led by Boehner. There are plenty of Republican. Mike Lee, very conservative senator from Utah, was championing it on the Senate floor. McConnell was kind of out there by himself, saying this was some sort of surrender to the terrorists and a win for Snowden. I think the media picked up on that, but I think at the end of the day, this is a win for the NSA and a loss for Snowden. You had a piece in the Daily Beast a few days ago where they were quoting some anonymous intelligence officials saying this is a big nothing burger for the privacy advocates. We don't lose anything in this. We don't even want to own the metadata database. It's a cumbersome thing to have to supervise. Better for the telecoms to have it. We can get what we want when we need it. And what's the difference? So that's why Obama's for it and Boehner's for it and Mike Lee is for it. It's not seen as
right,
but
I don't understand why. I agree. I tend to agree with you on this. I think that this. I think it was a fairly moderate but appropriate fix slash reform, but it is weird to see people like Mitch McConnell, who was so opposed to it on the grounds that it would weaken us, that he essentially allowed the Patriot Act to expire. And Marco Rubio says that the next president will have to reinstate the Patriot Act, all the provisions. And Tom Cotton was acting as if the end of the world is near because of the USA Freedom Act. It's really funny to see the spectrum of this, where people like Rand Paul think the USA Freedom Act is authoritarian and dystopian, and people like Rubio and Cotton and and McConnell and others feel like the USA Freedom Act is like giving away the farm and making us incredibly vulnerable. It's really weird to see the divergence of opinion on this one.
I mean, I can understand why Rubio and Cotton would do that. They're obviously playing. They both want to be seen as uber hawks, and Rubio wants that for his presidential race now, and Cotton probably wants that for his presidential race for the future. But I think people are very befuddled at McConnell's role in all this, and I haven't seen an article that really explained it well, because I think even the insiders are befuddled. He's not someone prone to impassionate speeches on the Senate floor. He's more of a legislative tactician. He's talked about wanting to find bipartisan compromises when possible and work with the president when possible. He's not known as being a diehard hawk compared to a McCain or a Lindsey Graham. So why this and why now? Why would he go to the mat on this to the point of risking the temporary lapse of the program, which he thinks is so important, only to totally capitulate at the end of the day?
I think this was sincere on McConnell's part. I mean, I think some of it is out of deference to I guess it's Senator Burr, who heads the pertinent committee, who felt strongly about this. But I think this is consistent. I wrote about this back in November, Bill. This, Cruz and Lee co-sponsored USA Freedom back in November, and I wrote essentially arguing that we should pass it then. to prevent the possibility of expiration of the Patriot Act. And back then, McConnell wouldn't do it, was against it. Now, there's some reasons as to why you might not want to pass it during a lame duck session. But this is not something new of McConnell. He has consistently been against anything that could in any way weaken the Patriot Act. So
you raise an interesting thought there. Was this a favor to Burr? Because Burr is up for re-election in 2016. He may be in for a tight race. He may believe that this stance is important to him and his state. If maybe McConnell was going overboard, so Burr would not be by himself, and it seemed like he had cover for his position.
Could be also, this could be part of, McConnell's new sort of new leadership of the Senate, and kind of a deference to committee chairman. I don't know the answer to it, but either way, it's an interesting debate, and I think it really demonstrates the amazing spectrum of opinion on this stuff, from Rand Paul to Ted Cruz being a centrist on this, really a moderate on this, and Mike Lee, to McConnell, Rubio, and in the House. I'm sorry, no longer in the House. But Cotton, also in the Senate from Arkansas, being on the other end of it. And then the House. I mean, the Republican House that historically has not been able to get things done. Of course, passed USA Freedom. And the problem was in the Senate. So that was I think at least some of this has to do with McConnell kind of learning the lessons that Boehner learned, had to start learning about 4 years ago. Of dealing with a new breed of Republican that tends to be less deferential to authority and more libertarian.
One of the things to say about bipartisanship, if I can segue to the sad news of the week, the passing of Beau Biden. It was striking how much all of Washington, all sides of the aisle, came around to console the vice president on the state. Biden, is mocked a lot on both the Republican side and on the Democratic side sometimes, but this really seemed to gut punch folks and knock down those partisan walls, even if only for a few days.
No, I think you're right. I did see a couple people say some sort of mean things, but overall, I think you're right. And I think hopefully humanity kicks in. I mean, anybody who's ever been a parent can, I think, put themselves in Joe Biden's shoes, and it's horrible. And then, of course, the history that he's had, in the past, and that he had to overcome even before he was sworn in as a senator. I guess the car crash that killed his wife and injured his two sons.
And he lost his 1-year-old daughter in that too.
Horrible. And you can read about that in What It Takes. The Richard Ben Kramer book, goes into that. Just horrible. And now for this to happen, politics is politics, but I think we obviously need to be able to, there are things that we can connect on our humanity. And I was glad to see that overall, I think most people did kind of rise to the occasion and behaved appropriately during that difficult time for him.
And in some happier news, but also I think breaking down some boundaries, is the Caitlyn Jenner photo shoot in Vanity Fair, which, as some have said, has broken the internet. One up in Kim Kardashian, if you will, and it definitely seems to be a milestone in transgender acceptance. You're not seeing. I don't think you see a lot of mocking and criticisms and attacks over this. Although you do have this one outlier, I think, that being Mike Huckabee, who oddly joked about, well, if only I could declare myself a woman, I get to shower with the girls in high school. You know, even Rick Santorum was classier on this subject a few weeks ago than Mike Huckabee was. Do you have?
Well, I think the Huckabee line. Am I wrong about this? I think the Huckabee line, not that it matters, but was just recently discovered, but it was said a while ago, like a couple months ago. I could be wrong.
I just caught a headline. I thought he said it at an event yesterday.
Yeah. I could be wrong. It's not like it happened 10 years ago. I don't know that it happened yesterday. I think it just came out yesterday. But either way, no, I thought about this, Bill. And
no, you're right. Earlier this year, it was February 2015.
Okay, right. So I think most people assume he said it yesterday, but it just happened to come out around the time that the Caitlyn Jenner news came out.
Upload to YouTube by WorldNet Daily. Someone on the right is looking to take him out.
Or they thought it was terrific and they wanted to brag about his comments. It's unclear. I thought about this, and it's interesting to me. So putting aside the sort of substantive question of what Huckabee said, it strikes me as a very sort of facile, whatever the word is, obvious, hackneyed type of joke, right? So it's like the first guy who ever said, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, probably got a couple laughs. But there's a type of person who just keeps kind of making those observations, those obvious observations for far too long. And it's something, Amy Schumer did this skit a couple years ago about like racist stuff her grandmother says. And there's this thing where like she introduces her like Hispanic boyfriend to her grandmother, and her grandmother's like, can you bring the car around and wash it? She like assumed that he was like hired help or something. It does strike me that like Huckabee is kind of in that zone, right now, for what that's worth. I know it's not the most like important part of this story, but I don't know, something about it struck me.
I guess this is question: how are conservatives prepared to keep up with the times, or are they going to insist on playing the reactionary role and appeal to those unsettled by these changes in hopes of whipping up that base? There seems to be, a degree of a trend in the Republican Party to move away from social issues for that reason, that it's not really helping them in swing states. But you potentially have folks like Huckabee and Santorum and Bobby Jindal who are trying to, grab that social conservative faction.
But I think there are legitimate things to raise about this. So, like, somebody brought up today. It might have been Jim Garrity. I don't know. Somebody brought up today. It might have been Molly Hemingway. I don't know. But somebody brought up today, like, this is a guy who made it, who sort of, in fact, I think Kris Jenner, frankly, his ex-wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife, Kris Jenner brought this point up, that, like, this is a guy who made a commitment to be a father and to get married to a woman who now has essentially walked away from that commitment. So to me that's a legitimate point to bring up about Bruce Jenner. There are questions about the sort of uber political correctness about this. About there are people out there shaming people who refer to Bruce Jenner as a he, and not a she.
Well, just what sort of basic bad etiquette? If someone tells you, "Please call me a she," and you don't, that's just sort of basic manners that you're not respecting how they want to be identified as.
Okay. Well, I think that there are legitimate debates to have about this topic. And I can just tell you, on the right, there are debates taking place now about this, about whether, hey, look, this is this is a Republican,
Well, so
let's
it
sort
was
of
to me a
not.
huge opportunity. I have this
Yeah,
extremely
yeah.
popular, high-profile Republican transgender woman. Let's work with this person and help him. Let him help us show that
Yeah.
we're in keeping with modernity.
So certainly there are conservatives who are making that point, and others though are saying like, this is a mental health issue. This is, you don't just decide your gender. You are assigned a gender as a rule, and you can't just decide to change your race. You can't just decide to change that you're a woman now, and you're going to use this bathroom. Um, I think that there are legitimate and serious questions about this that are fair game for discussion. It does strike me that things are changing very quickly, and I don't know where it's going to go, and that norms are changing. But I do think that the way that Huckabee talked about it is it's sort of aside. It's sort of another. How do I put it? It's like another issue, right? So you can have debates about this, about these questions. Is it wrong to say Bruce Jenner now, or to call him a he? Should you call her a she? You can have these debates, but I feel like the way that Huckabee did it is an unsophisticated and unhelpful way, and that's a different issue.
Do you think that the other candidates are going to be a bit more elegant in how they handle this?
Well, I think there's room for people to trip up here, certainly. But I suspect that the candidates that the sort of sharper candidates who are sharper is the wrong word, but I think someone like Marco Rubio would be less likely to to make a comment like that for a variety of reasons. So, and Huckabee may serve as a warning. Again, I think it's fair to. I mean, this is a legitimate thing to discuss, and I think it's fair to raise questions about society and about the culture and about the appropriateness of. I mean, all those things I think are legitimate if they're done in a the sort of sensitive way. I think that the way that Huckabee talked about it was not helpful.
I'd be curious. I wrote another piece for Politico last week about how the Fox News debate, the first Fox News debate in August, is going to be more treacherous for Republicans than people might suspect after the RNC took control of the debates and we wanted more conservative moderators. And now they're having moderators who have already tripped up Republican candidates. Megyn Kelly tripped up Jeb Bush on Iraq. Chris Wallace tripped up Marco Rubio on Iraq. And Brett Baer tripped up Scott Walker on immigration. The line was, we're not going to have these irrelevant questions like George Stephanopoulos asking about contraception now that there are RNC sanctioned debates. But nothing's stopping anyone at Fox News from saying, "What do you think about Caitlyn Jenner? What do you think about that she called herself a she? Do you agree with that? Do you think she should be allowed to? Do you think transgender people should teach in schools? There's all sorts of things that people could throw at them, and they may not be able to prevent avoiding those sorts of questions."
Yeah, look, as I think it's our third time talking about this, and I think that you're absolutely right, Bill. I mean, I think that number one, people trip up on softballs. Number two, don't assume that they're going to get softballs just because it's presumably a conservative outlet or a journalist who isn't hostile to your worldview. Does not mean that they're not going to ask tough questions, and it would be a mistake to be lulled into a false sense of security. It's entirely possible that more gaffes will come from interviews with Fox News. I do think that just to reiterate that there are this is a legitimate thing to discuss these issues. To do so, I mean, my thing, look, if you want to become a woman, like, fine. I don't, it doesn't bother me one bit. When you start telling, going into school and teaching kids, this is a normal, natural thing. I mean, it becomes very messy and very concerning to people who adhere to, traditionally, cultural, traditional values and political philosophy. So it's fair to bring up these questions, and don't be surprised if if the first Fox News debate has a Bruce Jenner question, has a Caitlyn Jenner question, whatever won't get me, shamed on social media.
I was trying to help you, Matt.
Thank you. See, you're trying to throw me a softball, and there you go. This just proves the point.
Anything else we want to talk about, Matt?
Yes, pre-order Too Dumb to Fail. Not just a clever title. Pre-order my forthcoming book, Too Dumb to Fail, on Amazon.com. And what do you got? What do you got cooking?
Well, I checked out my pieces on Politico last few days. Both the Hillary versus Jeb piece and Fox News Eats Its Own was the other one. If you go to the Politico.com/magazine page, you can find them both.
Awesome. Also, check out my podcast, Matt Lewis and the News. I just did a podcast on the book Rise of the Robots. And will they be coming to take your job? And if they do, is that a threat or a promise? And maybe we don't want a job. So we get into all that in the podcast discussion. Also, don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. Find us on Facebook, same formula. And you can listen to this on iTunes, not just to see our faces. We like you to watch us, but if you're jogging on the metro, whatever. I've been doing that, Bill. I've been listening to Bob and Connor and all other DMZ shows, and really enjoying it. I kind of like listening to them, but that's just me.
You're a loyal Blogging Heads fan.
I'm a fan of the whole catalog. It's not just, DMZ show's my favorite, but what is it, The Right Show? There's some lots of good stuff. So, and leave comments. Let us know what you think. And we'll see you back in the DMZ next week.
All right. Take care.
All right, bud.